In the latest episode of the Maxx Crosby podcast, the Las Vegas Raiders star pass rusher shared his thoughts on how the Philadelphia Eagles managed to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. He believes the Raiders should use a similar strategy. Let's break down what he said. Crosby explained that the Eagles focused on using a four-man pass rush the entire game. They didn't blitz at all, meaning they only sent 4 defenders after the quarterback while keeping 7 players back in coverage. This made it really tough for the Chiefs to find open receivers. He compared it to the 2020 Super Bowl when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers dominated the Chiefs in a similar way. According to Crosby, this strategy works because if your defensive line is strong and well-trained, it makes the job easier for the rest of the defense. Instead of constantly blitzing and leaving gaps in coverage, teams can focus on shutting down passing plays. The Eagles stuck to this plan all season, and it paid off. They had the best defense and one of the best rushing attacks in the league. Crosby believes this shows how important a strong four-man rush is. It allows defenses to stay solid in coverage while still putting pressure on the quarterback. In short, Crosby is making it clear. If a team has the right players and coaching, this defensive strategy can be a game changer. A strong defense wins games, and one of the best ways to do that is by using a four-man pass rush while keeping good coverage. Maxx Crosby is absolutely right about this. The Raiders aren't too far from being able to play this way consistently. During the 9 games under Antonio Pierce, the Raiders' defense was dominant. They didn't rely on blitzing too much, except in the game against the Chargers. Most of the time they stuck to a four-man rush, and it worked. With players like Malcolm Koonce, Adam Butler, and Maxx Crosby, they were able to pressure the quarterback effectively. Crosby's point makes sense when you look at what the Eagles have done. The last time they made the Super Bowl, their pass rush was a huge factor. That season, they even broke the sack record. They had elite players like Javon Hargrave, Brandon Graham, who was younger and in top form, and others. This year, they continued that success with a young but dominant defensive line. Crosby is basically saying the Eagles won by sticking to their four-man rush, and maybe the Raiders should do the same. However, we have to be realistic. Right now, the Raiders aren't quite at that level. They have talented players like Crosby, Koonce, Christian Wilkins, and Butler, but keeping all these players together long-term will be tough. Contracts will get expensive. Butler and Koonce could end up earning over $10 million each per year. Still, there are ways to maintain a strong pass rush. If Koonce leaves, the Raiders could look for young talent like Abdul Carter or James Pierce Jr. They could also rely on Tyree Wilson to step up and play a bigger role. The key is keeping that pass rush strong. If the Raiders can do that, they'll have a much better shot at dominating on defense. Tyree Wilson is a versatile player. He can line up at different spots on the defensive line, from the 3 technique to the edge. He even has the speed and power to be a true pass rusher. This is why the Raiders should really consider the strategy Maxx Crosby is talking about. The Eagles had a lot of success this season using this approach, and it's worth mentioning that Raiders defensive coordinator Patrick Graham already uses a similar philosophy. His system is influenced by Vic Fangio, one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. The key to this system is keeping 2 safeties deep almost all the time. This makes it very difficult for offenses to throw deep passes. It forces them to go on long, slow drives to score, which isn't easy. If the Raiders tweak their roster a bit, they could fully commit to this defensive style. Bringing back key players like Trevon Merrick and Nate Hobbs would be important. Jack Jones could also improve now that the defensive line is getting stronger. Even rookie cornerback Jacorian Bennett showed promise last season. Adding another defensive lineman could make a big difference. Maybe they draft a defensive tackle early or wait until the 2nd round since this draft class has several good ones. If they can also bring back Malcolm Koonce, the pass rush could be even stronger. At the end of the day, winning on defense comes down to pressuring the quarterback with just 4 players. That allows the rest of the defense to focus on coverage. This is why a strong defensive coordinator matters so much. Great coaching can make a huge impact on a team's secondary and linebackers. We've seen talented defensive backs struggle when moving to a different system. For example, J.C. Jackson looked like a star in New England but didn't have the same success after leaving. The right scheme and coaching can make all the difference. If the Raiders fully commit to this system and strengthen their defensive line, they could have one of the best defenses in the league. Cornerbacks often depend on their defensive coach and system. For example, Trevon Diggs looked like an elite corner under Dan Quinn, but when Quinn wasn't coaching him, he struggled. This happens to a lot of defensive backs. The right coaching makes a big difference. Pass rush, however, is different. You can't just throw any player on the defensive line and expect them to dominate like Maxx Crosby. Tyree Wilson, for example, is a good player, but he's not Maxx Crosby. If he were the team's best pass rusher, the Raiders wouldn't have the same success. That's why having real talent on the defensive line is so important. You can take a chance on a cornerback in the later rounds of the draft, but pass rushers need to be top-level players from the start. Maxx Crosby seems to believe the same thing, and hopefully the Raiders take this strategy seriously. If they do, they'll have a much stronger defense heading into next season. Now, speaking of Crosby, there's an update on his injury. He recently said his recovery from a left ankle injury is going well. The boot is coming off next Monday, and he's feeling great. This is a big deal because Crosby is known for his incredible work ethic. The moment the season ends, he's already training for the next one. But this offseason has been different. His injury has kept him from working out for about a month and a half. Some people might think missing a couple of months of training isn't a big deal, but it actually is. Just look at Kolton Miller. He didn't have a full offseason last year, and when he showed up to OTAs in April, he wasn't ready. He struggled through training camp, and during the first half of the season, he gave up more sacks than he had since his rookie year. This shows how important early preparation is. Crosby is eager to get back to work, and once he's fully healthy, he'll be ready to dominate again. As the season went on, Kolton Miller improved, but the Raiders can't afford to start slow. Maxx Crosby is the team's best player, and having him at full strength is critical. The good news is that his recovery is going well, and his boot is coming off soon. That means he can start getting back to work. Now, let's talk about something interesting. Pete Carroll. There's a great story about him that shows the kind of coach he is. A Sports Illustrated article from a few years ago shared a moment from when Golden Tate played for the Seattle Seahawks. During a team meeting, Pete Carroll stood in front of the players and said, "Hey, we've got this new Gatorade. Make sure you try it before practice. It's supposed to hydrate you really well. We don't want anyone pulling a muscle." But when the players opened the cooler, a fake snake popped out. Guys jumped back, some screamed, and Carroll had a hidden camera capturing it all. The next day, he played the best reactions for the entire team. This just shows the type of person Carroll is. He knows how to have fun. He's not just about football. He's about building a positive culture. That's refreshing, especially for a team like the Raiders. Compare that to Josh McDaniels. When he was in charge, he ran things in a strict, almost military-like way. It was the Patriot way, or nothing. But when he got fired, Antonio Pierce took over, and the energy shifted. Players were suddenly playing basketball, relaxing, and even smoking cigars. The atmosphere was completely different. The players made it clear McDaniels was too strict, and it wasn't enjoyable. We've heard similar stories about Bill Belichick's coaching style. The difference? Belichick has won multiple Super Bowls. McDaniels hasn't. That's why having a coach like Pete Carroll, who knows how to balance discipline and fun, could be a great thing for a team like the Raiders. Pete Carroll isn't just a Super Bowl winning coach, he's also someone who knows how to keep things fun. Players have shared stories about his unique coaching style, and one of the best ones is about his scooter races. Malcolm Smith once said that Carroll set up a loop inside the coach's office and had timed scooter races. Another player mentioned that every day felt exciting because they never knew what fun thing Carroll would come up with next. Britt said that Carroll even set aside time in the day just for pure fun. That's what makes him different. He knows when to be serious, but he also understands that building a strong culture matters. That's the kind of energy he's bringing to the Raiders. Now, realistically, Carroll isn't a long-term coach. His contract is for 3 years, with an option for a fourth. Whether it's his decision or the team's, he may retire after that. That's why the Raiders need to take advantage of this coaching staff while they have them. It's not just Carroll. Chip Kelly and Patrick Graham are both head coaching candidates, meaning they might not be around in a few years either. The Raiders have to capitalize on this window. A strong coaching staff can take a team a long way. Just look at the Philadelphia Eagles when they won their Super Bowl. It wasn't just because of their quarterback. It was because of a well-built roster, a great offensive coordinator, and a dominant defensive line. The Raiders need to follow that blueprint if they want to win. You don't need an elite quarterback to win. What matters is having a great coaching staff and a strong team. If Jalen Hurts had been on the Raiders the past few seasons, he wouldn't have been able to carry the team to success on his own. It's about the system and the pieces around the quarterback. This year, the Raiders have a legitimate coaching staff. If they make the right moves, they can be competitive. Key players like Brock Bowers, Jackson Powers-Johnson, and even Colton Miller are on reasonable contracts, which gives the team flexibility. At quarterback, the Raiders have options. Whether it's a veteran like Matthew Stafford or even someone like Russell Wilson, the team could bring in experience to stay competitive in the short term. On defense, bringing back key players like Malcolm Kuntze, Nate Hobbs, and Trayvon Moehrig would give the team a solid foundation. If they also add a top wide receiver like Titaroa McMillan, who has great size, route-running ability, and athleticism, the offense could take a major step forward. By keeping their defensive core intact, adding a veteran quarterback, and drafting key playmakers, the Raiders could position themselves to make a real push this season. The Raiders need to focus on adding playmakers, not just filling positions. Anthony Belton is a top prospect who could be a dominant guard within 2 years. If they land him, he would provide versatility, potentially playing both guard and tackle. Adding 2 running backs in the draft could be a smart move. Caleb Johnson and Quinshon Judkins are both elite talents who could bring dynamic playmaking to the offense. The best teams in the NFL have multiple weapons, not just one feature back. Players like Judkins could even line up in the slot or be used in motion, making the offense more unpredictable. The key isn't just having a high-yardage running back. It's about maximizing touches for all playmakers. Pairing top talent like Brock Bowers, Trey Tucker, and Titaroa McMillan with a solid veteran quarterback would create a dangerous offense. If the Raiders make the right moves, they could build one of the league's most explosive offenses. Anthony Belton was in the PF mock draft simulator, and honestly, I think he's much better than the 68th overall pick. In my opinion, he's closer to being a top 20 player. If a team manages to get him, they're getting a strong and versatile lineman. Belton can play as a guard, left or right, but he also has the skills to play tackle. I believe that within 2 years in the NFL, he could become one of the top 3 guards. That's the kind of talent he has. Now, let's talk about what the Raiders are building. They're not just adding a solid guard like Belton. They're also bringing in top-tier talent at other positions. Caleb Johnson is one of the best running backs in this draft, and Tetro McMillan is one of the top 2 wide receivers. Pair them with players like Brock Bowers, Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers, Jackson P. Johnson, and Colton Miller, and suddenly you have a dangerous offense. The Raiders are also adding another running back, Quinshon Judkins. Some people might question why they're taking 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds, but look at how successful teams are built. The best teams don't just have one great running back, they have depth. The Lions, for example, have 2 strong backs. The 49ers have Christian McCaffrey, yet they still draft running backs regularly. The Chiefs are another example. They always have multiple playmakers in their backfield and receiving core. For the Raiders, adding Caleb Johnson and Quinshon Judkins isn't just about getting 2 running backs. It's about adding 2 offensive weapons. Judkins can even line up in the slot, move around, and be a threat in different ways. These guys aren't going to carry the ball 30 times a game. Instead, they'll be used smartly to create mismatches and make plays. This is how you build an elite offense. If the Raiders can land a top quarterback like Aaron Rodgers or Matthew Stafford because they need an elite QB to complete the picture, this team could become a serious contender. Russell Wilson is a good quarterback, but I wouldn't call him elite. He's solid, just like Kirk Cousins, but he's not at the very top. When it comes to long-term options, I wouldn't bet on Justin Fields either. If you're thinking long-term, it's better to draft a quarterback and develop him properly. Now, let's talk about some underrated players. Jordan Phillips is a solid defensive tackle who doesn't get enough credit. Then there's Braden Swinson. Personally, I think he's a first-round talent. But when I took him in the 5th round, PFF gave me an F for the pick, which is just crazy. Drafting a young quarterback to develop under a veteran is always a smart move. I actually looked at all the quarterbacks who were drafted outside the first 2 rounds, and the list is pretty short. Only a few quarterbacks drafted later have really made an impact. Some of them became strong backups like Joshua Dobbs. Then there's Geno Smith. Before he became a solid starter, he was just seen as a backup. Hendon Hooker, a 2nd-round pick, is another example of a guy with potential. For the Raiders, taking a quarterback in the later rounds could be a great strategy. If you find a player with upside, he could turn into a valuable piece for the future. Another position to focus on is defensive depth. Cameron Jackson is a player I really like, and the Raiders need to add depth on the defensive line, especially if they don't keep Adam Butler. Issa is another underrated player. He could be a long-term tackle in the NFL. And Joshua Gray, he's a very solid interior lineman. Looking at this mock draft, if the Raiders followed this exact plan, I truly believe they could compete for a Super Bowl this season. Some people might say that's unrealistic, but look at history. The Commanders went from having the 2nd overall pick to reaching the championship game in just 1 year. A great draft can change everything, especially if you land the right quarterback. Look at the Texans. They went from having the number 2 overall pick to making the playoffs 2 years in a row. We've seen teams make big jumps like this before. The Chiefs are another great example. Ever since they brought in Patrick Mahomes, they've been Super Bowl contenders almost every season. A big reason for their success is smart drafting and great coaching under Andy Reid. I don't see any reason why the Raiders can't make a similar push. The difference between a bottom 5 team and a top 5 team isn't as big as people think. A lot of it comes down to coaching. Sure, having a great quarterback helps, but the right coaching staff and talented playmakers can turn a struggling team into a contender. Now, for a quick update, Luke Getsy has landed another job, this time with the Green Bay Packers as a senior offensive assistant. It's interesting to see how he keeps getting coaching opportunities. He has worked with Matt LaFleur before, so it makes sense that he's joining him again. Not a major story, but I thought it was worth mentioning. As we move forward, there won't be a lot of big updates for a while. Over the next month, we might see the Raiders release some players or make a trade, but things will stay quiet for the most part. However, as we get closer to free agency, the rumors will start flying. By early March, even though teams can't officially sign players until March 10th, we'll start hearing reports, like the Raiders being interested in Christian Wilkins or other big names. That's it for now. Hope you all have a great day and enjoy the weekend. I'll be back soon with another update.